what's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, I am still, as of Thursday afternoon, waiting on anyone, to outline to me why private equity in college sports is a no-brainer. I want someone to just say, Connor, here's why this makes perfect sense. Go. Haven't had it happen yet. Haven't.
Yeah, I mean, what we're facing is like very close to almost like the Premier League, right? Where it's like, I mean, I don't know if you followed that Super League they tried to make a couple of years ago around COVID times and all the fans revolted. I'm really hoping all of you that are listening just take to the streets and revolt, because we're kind of getting to that point where all the money is starting to edge people out. And what I'm scared of, kind of like we've talked about, is, Big Ten SEC at the top, all the rest of the former P5, our core four in the middle, and then G5 at the bottom. And what we don't want is for college football to turn into Dallas Cowboys games with all the personal seat licenses and all the money being the deciding factors of who does what. It's already there. We know that there's always money in the sport. We're not naive. But at the same time, private equity just feels like a bridge too far to be. Do you agree?
Like a slippery slope that all of a sudden just turns into a sheet of black ice. That's what It feels like to me. And I get it that we're already down that path, and for some, maybe it makes financial sense. By some, I mean the people that are trying to figure out the revenue sources to be able to fund all these different settlements, because that's really what this all comes down to. If you're having trouble keeping tabs on this story and why it's going to impact college sports and why things are changing so rapidly, basically the previous 4 years of NIL, like those 4 years before that, all of those athletes are going to be compensated with this settlement, and there's massive discrepancy about how that's going to be funded, what all that's going to look like. But basically it feels like selling your soul to the devil for this influx of capital, and that I understand in some ways and understand in others. But it feels like so far everything that I have seen, and we're not going to dig into this a whole lot today because quite frankly I just don't really want to talk about it that much. I understand it's changing, but to me, I think that's like a very doom and gloom type thing that I don't really know that people want to hear me talk about for a half hour, 40 minutes, or however long. Yeah. So that's kind of why I'm not necessarily digging into this that much. It's obviously worth mentioning at the top because it's the huge news in college sports this week, but it just feels like one of those storylines that everybody that I saw react to was, oh, this is a terrible idea.
Yeah, and I think that kind of what gets lost in not, maybe a little bit of the paying players argument, but again, like we were all cool with, I think most of us were cool with regulated NIL. Like we all thought it was cool when Bo Nix got a Milo's deal. We all think it's cool when DeColdest gets the air conditioner deal. Like I think that's fair when a guy earns a deal and it's actually making a company money. We start to get into the life wallet, private equity, stuff like that. What I always said about that type of paying players, which private equity fully falls into, is like, what 90% of college football was guys playing for non-Power 5 schools, right? So that's talking about, Division I, Division II, Division III, all that different stuff, then going to like a Toledo, Tulsa, those type of group of 5 schools. Most college football athletes were truly playing to get a degree, to continue to play the game they love. And then it would turn into, I always joke about the Enterprise commercial where it's like, we hire more college athletes than anyone. It's like your watch would end, you would hang up your cleats, you would go on to the next phase of your career with a degree, right? And yeah, you got benefits. I'm sure you got free stuff at restaurants. You got lots of fans. You got a really great college experience. But now what it's turned into is, okay, well, if you are a freshman sensation at Bowling Green, well, now FSU has billions of dollars from this private equity fund. They're just going to toss you a milli and you just kind of move up. Like we said, it's like a tiered system. So yeah, I think to see the erosion of like the hometown team, to see people's alma maters. And again, I went to Full Sail, so we don't have a football team. But like Indiana's a great example, right? It's like they're watching a guy like Randall L. Well, that guy would just go to Ohio State now.
That's a really daunting thought, but yeah, you're probably right. I mean, and that's why so much of this feels like a loss, I think, for the landscape of college sports as a whole. And while there are probably some truths and some non-truths in terms of the way that this would all impact the thing that we love more than anything else, which is Saturdays in the fall, it would still be a seismic shift and very, very different than just talking about NIL. So it's obviously huge news, and I'm not denying that. I just didn't necessarily want to make that the majority of our conversation today. So instead, here's what we do have coming up. Great show on the way, on the heels of what's just been a weird week in college athletics. Matt Baker of the Tampa Bay Times is going to join us to break down this Jaden Rashada lawsuit, other very big news in college sports this week. Talk about side of the times, man. Goodness gracious. But great perspective from Matt on that. And then also great perspective on the big three programs in the state of Florida, something that he has dug into more in depth than probably anybody that you will possibly find. And then we've got Pitch Me SEC Tailgates coming up at the end. But first,
I just want to say this really quick on Rashada. I quote tweeted this because all this stuff has been kind of floating around. I think college football will kind of fundamentally be fine as long as these coaches remain as petty as they are. Like, grown men pettiness is the most powerful force in the world. And when you see the press release or the story of, Rashada ran it by Kirby Smart if he could sue Billy Napier, and Kirby was like, yeah, man, sure, go for it. And he probably was like, heck yeah, buddy, go for it. That's what really gives me hope in college sports, that we got a dude as a two-time national champion. He's like, yeah, let's pull it over, little Billy. Let's go after it, dude. Get after it.
And everybody knows, everybody who roots for a team would love it if that's the approach you had to your rival's coach.
And if it was the inverse, you'd feel the exact same way. Exactly what you just said. If a guy comes over, who's the linebacker that came over from Georgia during COVID? He went from Georgia to Florida.
Wow. Why am I blanking on?
You guys all know what I'm
talking. Brenton Cox.
Yeah, if it was Brenton Cox and he was suing Kirby Smart, you guys would be like, we got you. And that's the beautiful part of college football that happens like nowhere else, where it's like, we're rooting for lawsuits. This is beautiful.
We need more of this. I need more. Yes. I need more rival coaches signing off on lawsuits against a rival coach. That's the type of content that we need to be able to have. So yeah, we will discuss that, as well as kind of the Kirby aspect of this and kind of what the fallout could be from everything Rashada related. We will get to that in a bit. But first, Will, we do have some pressing things that we need to be able to discuss here, because the SEC needs to develop a tiebreaker system, a new tiebreaker system. Tiebreakers were a very hot topic of conversation with SEC baseball, with Tennessee, Kentucky fans, the way all that played out, the co-champs thing, it only matters for the seeding, whatever. SEC football has a very different issue, because it's something that I would assume is going to be discussed in Destin next week, SEC meetings. I assume that's going to be on the agenda. I can't say with certainty that it will be discussed in depth, but just in case it's not, or even if it is, I thought today would be a good day to discuss a new tiebreaker system in the SEC, because it is the first time that an SEC conference title game will exist, and we won't have divisions to settle who gets there. That's why we're having this discussion. Back when the SEC championship became a thing, 1992, divisions were established. We now do not have East and West. That is no longer a thing. No more easy way to decide who plays in an SEC championship. You can't just default to the head-to-head between two teams tied for the division. During the SEC championship era, we only had 2 instances of 3 teams who were tied at the top of the division standings. There was 2002, where Arkansas won that tiebreaker by virtue of beating both LSU and Auburn. The LSU game, shout out my guy Matt Jones on Hit That Line, a game that LSU fans probably don't remember very fondly in Little Rock, the way that played out. Went back and watched the highlights of that one this morning. Matt Jones, legend. 2003, that's the other one. 2003, it got really interesting. We had Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida all at 6-2. And this is a little bit before my time, so apologies for those who remember this very well. But this was I had totally just erased this from my brain, something that happened 21 years ago. But that year, the SEC had to scramble in November to add a 7th tiebreaker, because they realized, oh my God, these teams are about to go through the first 6 tiebreakers. And it was originally, for the 7th tiebreaker, athletic directors voting on who should go to Atlanta. Yes. Can you imagine this? South Carolina's AD is just sitting there going, do I want to see Georgia, Florida, or Tennessee play in an SEC championship? It was tribal council and Survivor.
This is the inverted college football playoff.
Yes, exactly. Exactly that. How did it the only way it ever gets to that point in real bylaws is guys, we've been going at this for 3 hours. We got a break for lunch. Let's just put down a 7 tiebreaker. We'll just vote on it or whatever. This is a placeholder. We don't actually think this is going to happen. And then they had the foresight in early November to be like, oh boy, Mike Slive gets all the ADs together and says, we can't have you guys do this. This would be a laughing stock for the league. And it would have been such a terrible, terrible look. So instead, in early November, they vote unanimously to change the tiebreaker. Originally, ADs voting on who would go to Atlanta. The ADs not involved in the tiebreaker. And then instead, the 7th tiebreaker became the BCS standings, unless the second of the tied teams was ranked within 5 or fewer places of the highest ranked tied team, which would then go back to the head-to-head result of those two teams. That's the last caveat. Confusing, right? Confusing. But it played out, Will. And here's why it played out. Georgia was number 7 in those BCS standings, and Tennessee was number 9 post-regular season BCS standings. So before conference championship weekend, within 5 spots, 7 and 9, within 5 spots. But Georgia then got the nod ahead of Tennessee because it beat Tennessee 41-14 in the regular season. So kind of mattered, but it was kind of just a way to be able to whittle it down to those two and not have it just default to BCS standings. Georgia also got the nod because Florida lost to Florida State, which was significant. And if Florida had beaten Florida State, it would have probably been ahead of Georgia in the BCS standings.
The win probably at the point because they were still kind of their glory years. They would have folded. So that's the risk and the loss of having these out of conference games, which they could have put you in, but could have taken you out.
Which is weird. Just kind of dumb. Kind of dumb if you really want to dig into it, that like Florida playing Florida State is going to have an impact over the conference championship. Like what? That's not really how it should all break down. But Florida losing that game to Florida State opens the door for Georgia to be able to get into that SEC championship in 2003. Very complicated. Very dumb. Yes. The SEC was unprepared.
You want to hear something funny, Connor? I just thought about this. This is like a core memory I've just unlocked. This must have been like the first Drew Brees year. So that would have been like, 2006? I remember having to care about NFL playoff standings for the first time. And I swear to God, me and my mom were like, so does the BCS handle this too? Like, how does this work? Like, is there an AP poll? What are we doing here? And then, like, the concept of simple, straightforward standings as college football fans was just out of our purview.
Life as a Saints fan in the pre-Drew Brees era, you're like, how do they do the playoffs again?
No idea. We won our first playoff game in like 2000, dude. It was not a pressing issue.
Unbelievable. The SEC was wildly unprepared because too many of those tiebreakers were basically just the same thing with like record versus both opponents, divisional record, stuff where you could just tie over and over and over. Just didn't really make a whole lot of sense. For a conference title berth, it had to pivot away from an athletic director vote and default to things that happened in non-conference play. It should never have come down to that, but it did. And it did because you didn't ever think that it was going to be a reality. So let's get ahead of this now. Let's do this. If this happens in 2024, they'll have nobody to blame but themselves because we're providing the blueprint today. What an embarrassing thing that would be. And I realize SEC meetings coming up here, it's going to have a ton of more important things to be able to break down: future non-conference schedule, revenue sharing, private equity funding, all those different things that are at the forefront of every college football conversation in this changing landscape. I get all of that, but they've got a 2024 season in which they need to settle on these tiebreakers just to understand what do you need to do to get to the SEC championship now that we don't have divisions. And to ensure that this is not 2003 all over again, where all of a sudden it's November and they're like, oh crap, well, we didn't do our homework here. We got to figure this out right now. I did their work for them. This is like when you're a kid and you see that your parents are super busy. I don't know what your parents could possibly be doing. Maybe they're planning for a party or something like that. They're stressed out about a million things. And there are just so many different things that they have to take care of. So then you like put your own dishes in the sink and you're like, see, mom and dad, I helped. Look, I made your life easier. And they're like, yeah, shut up. Get out of my way. This is what we need to be able to do. Establishing a new SEC tiebreaker should be probably higher than, 50th on the SEC list of priorities. But you get what I'm saying. It's something that has a lot of value in it. And it's why it's worth discussing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Will. We're throwing away the old system mostly, not entirely, but mostly. Head to head.
I do want to say we didn't say how the 2003 SEC championship ended, but
Did LSU win that? Yeah, LSU won that game
they beat
against
Georgia.
What was the final score?
34-13.
Who was the MVP?
Oh man, Justin Vincent. That was that game where you just cooked them. Yes. So just want to put a bow on that discussion. It ended up not really bad.
Just had to throw that in there. Yeah.
Just had to. I wanted to tell the end of the story. Okay, we were in the middle.
Perfectly fair. Perfectly fair. All right, so let's talk about the way that this needs to all kind of flow, because head to head is still obviously going to be valued. It's still part of the tiebreaker, even though we no longer have divisions. It's going to be number one here. If Texas is 8-0, Georgia is 7-1, and Bama is also 7-1, we could default to the head to head result of Georgia and Alabama, which in this scenario would be advantage Georgia, because Texas can only get to 8-0 by beating Georgia in this thing that we've created. So I'm not really here to change that. That's not what we're going to do. The games have to matter. That's the most important thing. I'm not going to create some weird system where it's got a loophole for head-to-head to be minimized. I am, however, going to create a tiebreaker system that keeps conference competition at the forefront and never has athletic directors voting on an SEC championship participant. None of that. That will not be part of this today. All right. Tiebreaker number one is head-to-head. What if it's three teams, though? What if it's three teams?
Mm-hmm.
The only way that a tiebreaker with three teams can be decided with head-to-head in this world that I'm creating is if one of those teams beat both of the other two teams. Just beating one of them is not good enough. You do not get to end this by just beating one of them. So if Texas, Georgia, and Alabama are all 7-1 in SEC play, but Texas only beat Georgia and didn't face Bama because they're not on each other's schedule regular season, all three teams would move on to the next tiebreaker. Okay. In 2022, if you had taken away divisions, you would have had Tennessee, LSU, and Alabama all at 6-2 in SEC play, fighting for that last spot. Georgia would have already been in at 8-0 in conference play. But in this instance that we're talking about, if it was divisionless in 22, Tennessee beat both LSU and Bama. So it would have won the head-to-head tiebreaker and advanced to the SEC championship against Georgia. Does that make sense?
Yes. And that's the dream scenario, right? Where it's like we just handled business. Clearly, we beat both of these teams. But to your point, it's very rarely that, because you were talking about three great teams, right?
Exactly. Three great teams. And chances are that you're getting to 6-2 by having a little bit of chaos. And maybe you beat up on each other. Maybe you didn't face both of those teams. And so you need to have something else in place, which obviously we have. So tiebreaker number two. Total victories versus SEC teams that finish with a winning conference record. Simple enough, right? This rewards the strength of your conference schedule forever. And you can relate to this as a fan of an SEC West team. Going 6-2 as an SEC West team was different than going 6-2 as an SEC East team. And I know SEC East fans, you don't want to hear this. You don't want to hear this, but it's reality. If you don't think it's reality, tell me why the SEC West won 13 of the last 15 SEC championships. All right. If
y'all saw Jim McElwain's career, come on now. Y'all still fired him after we won the East.
Yeah, twice.
We know that's not that impressive.
Yeah, exactly. And by the way, for those that just say, oh, it's all Bama, LSU and Auburn both won multiple West titles in that stretch. So I don't really think that you can default to that when obviously you had just those two SEC East crowns via Georgia. Not all 6-2 conference records are created equally. They're just not. Did you beat a team who was in contention to get to Atlanta, or was your best conference win against a South Carolina team that went 4-4 in SEC play? I like this because it allows us to be able to use the entire body of work to determine the strength of schedule. It's better than wins versus teams who are ranked in the AP top 25 at the time of the matchup, because as we know, rankings change a lot. Beating an SEC team who goes 5-3 or 6-2 in conference play, it should matter more. It does. I applied this to what 2017 would have looked like without divisions. Auburn, Alabama, and Georgia all went 7-1 in SEC play that year. Auburn would have had the head-to-head tiebreaker by beating Alabama and Georgia. So Auburn would have already been in. But Alabama and Georgia would have been fighting for that last spot, and they didn't play in the regular season. They played in the postseason. You might have heard about how that went. Alabama's lone win versus an SEC team that finished with a winning conference record was LSU. Georgia's lone win versus an SEC team that finished with a winning conference record was South Carolina. They both had one such victory against an SEC team with a winning conference record, which would mean in my system, we would go to a third tiebreaker. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, tiebreaker number 3, Will. Total conference wins among teams beaten in SEC play. This sounds complicated. It's not. It's just imperialism. That's all it is.
Okay, sure.
If you don't know the definition of imperialism, go look it up. If you beat an SEC team, you inherit their total number of conference victories.
Let's go.
That incentivizes strength of schedule in conference play still. So let's say your LSU squad is involved in one of those tiebreaker scenarios, and you're adding up LSU's total conference wins among teams it beat in SEC play. Let's say LSU beat a Mississippi State squad who went 2-6 in SEC play. You would add 2 to LSU's total. LSU beats a Vandy squad who goes 0-8 in SEC play. Add 0 to LSU's total. LSU beats an Alabama squad who went 7-1 in SEC play. Add 7 to LSU's total. You're still incentivizing strength of conference schedule. That's what I like about that. You're adding the possibility for more variance so that a tiebreaker can do what it's intended to actually do, which is break a tie. I don't know why I needed to say that, but it felt very necessary because sometimes when I look at these old tiebreaker systems that the SEC had, I'm like, you didn't want to break a tie.
Right.
You did not want to break a tie at all. And it's very frustrating that you had all these things laid out and they were just repeating themselves. If we go back to our 2017 example with Georgia and Alabama, this would have indeed broken the tie. Georgia beat conference opponents who had a total of 21 SEC victories that year, while Alabama beat conference opponents who had a total of 19 SEC victories. Georgia would have advanced to the SEC championship to face Auburn. But let's apply this to a divisionless SEC in 2023, just to get weird. Alabama and Georgia, they wouldn't have been in a tiebreaker scenario because they were both 8-0 in SEC play. They both would have been in Atlanta without needing a tiebreaker. So this is purely hypothetical. I'm just looking at their resumes here for this, okay? This wouldn't have settled the tie. That's how crazy this is. In 2023, the total conference victories of teams that Alabama beat in SEC play was 28. In 2023, the total conference victories of teams that Georgia beat in SEC play was also 28. So we would have needed a fourth tiebreaker if that were the case.
So I love this one so much that I would actually just replace the second one with this one because I think that, because think about it. I mean, if you beat 2 good teams and the rest of the teams you beat are trash, in theory, right? They're just making stuff up, right? So then you have 2 winning record teams and then the rest of them are trash. But if you do this, then you would weigh the negative assets. Like let's say one team plays Vandy and smashes them and the other team beats Kentucky, who is like an 8-win team. It's like, well, yeah, maybe they were like, 500 in SEC play, but that's a way better team than Vandy. So, like, yeah, I actually love this. To your point, sometimes, if you're tied at 28 and stuff, sure, but I think that's a lot less common than how many winning teams did you beat. I love this example.
Okay, I would be on board with that. I really would. I think people like myself want to see the quality wins rewarded, and both tiebreaker 2 and tiebreaker 3 do just that. And you're right, man. If we're getting to more variance with that third tiebreaker, then why not just put it at the second one? I don't see any reason why you couldn't do that. I actually might need to make some tweaks. That's what we're here to do, though. There's nothing wrong with that. Okay, I like that idea. But let's say, just hypothetically, that you need to go to a fourth tiebreaker. Tiebreaker number 4 is the total scoring margin against conference opponents. Well, I'm going to be honest. I pray we don't get to this.
This is fantasy football. Yep. This is the one that fantasy football uses. And every year, I'm that team that loses like weird games. I have this super high scoring margin. And I'm just rooting for people to lose.
I hate it.
It's different in real life, though. With real teams and real players. In fantasy, it's all just like who you play that week. And the players aren't actually playing each other. But yeah, it's completely different in real life.
I would really, really prefer to just have 3 tiebreakers. Or even 2, I guess, and to not have to get to this fourth one. And
your coach has to go fight the other coach in midfield.
And if he knocks him out in the first round, he gets to advance to the college football playoff.
Exactly.
Just bypass the SEC championship.
Boom, done.
Yeah. Well, if
Clark Lee stocks up.
Clark Lee actually gets an extension after another frustrating year at Vandy. Like
Fighting coaches at midfield like Russell Crowe. Like, actually, let's just do this instead of playing football.
Like they extended him through 2035. Really? It's ambitious.
What could you do? Yeah.
So the reason I hate this is kind of what you just mentioned there. There are two reasons. I don't think that there is a difference between beating Vandy, to keep with the Clark Lee example. There's not a difference between beating Vandy by 21 versus beating Vandy by 42. Okay? Do we look at Georgia any differently if they beat Vandy by 21 versus beating them by 42? No. That does not change my opinion about the strength of a team. If a game is lopsided and decisive, I think there's a certain line that once it's crossed, I don't really think more about it. Okay? Like, we don't get into the weeds that way because you just don't have to. You just do not have to get to those places where you're like, well, 28-point victory as opposed to a 43-point victory. I don't know how 43-point victories happen, but you get what I'm saying. I value scoring margin versus Power 5 opponents with playoff contenders because I do think that it is more or less the eye test, kind of just mapped out with a metric. And so I think some of that stuff is the subconscious default that a lot of people in this business go to without even realizing it. So that's why I kind of like to do that, to follow along. Mm-hmm. If they're telling me that the eye test, that Oregon is passing all these eye test numbers, I'm like, all right, so let's see if that stat kind of plays that out, and it can kind of confirm some of that. But I at least like having that number behind it. But trying to settle on a conference championship participant with average scoring margin against conference opponents, to me, is frustrating. And I don't like it. I hate the idea of thinking that because a team beat Vandy by 42 instead of by 21, it advanced to a conference title game. That could dramatically sway total scoring margin versus conference opponents in a way that I don't believe that it should. And let's also remember the timing of this. We're about to start the 12-team playoff, wherein we could have teams play as many as 17 football games.
Yep.
If your coach is up 42 points, you shouldn't have to debate, or he shouldn't have to debate, whether or not to leave his starters in to help his chances of making a conference title game. Okay? Like, just should not have to do that. That game is over as far as I'm concerned.
Yep.
I do believe scoring margin has its place and relevance, but for me, I don't like the idea of ever defaulting to that, because while I don't care about running up the score, I do care about championship-worthy teams making personnel decisions that give them the best chance to be able to win a title instead of focusing on squeezing out that late touchdown in a 3-score game against Kentucky. All right, it just should not matter, because if it ever gets to that point, and if we ever look back on a season and say, oh, they won on this tiebreaker, and that's what got them to Atlanta, maybe that's what they needed to get into the college football playoff or something like that. If that ever happens, the coach in the future will always have that in the back of their mind, and others will as well. And it just creates this terrible precedent that I do not like. It's an unnecessary variable to throw into the mix as like a number 2 or a number 3 tiebreaker. But I get that it should, in theory, be the catch-all for the 4th tiebreaker.
Yeah, I feel like I'm fully aligned on this, and I didn't really have an opinion necessarily, but I do think there's a huge difference, right? So it's like I said, on one end you get fantasy football, which no one's actually playing each other, so I think it does matter. Then you have in pro sports, blowouts are hilarious because these are grown men who are getting fully tens of millions of dollars. If you watch a 40-point NBA blowout, it is one of the funniest things you could ever see. MLB games where you got the position players pitching, those are funny, right? And the Saints beat the Colts one year 63-3 or something, when they were trying to get Andrew Luck, and it was just funny because it's you guys are grown men, you're getting smacked. I don't have sympathy for you. If you're just some dude with a math test on Wednesday and you just got Kirby Smart just knocking the crap out of you for an extra quarter and a half, it's dude, you're ruining my sense of self here. At the end of the day, I know that we like to pretend that these guys are all 40-year-old men and they're all Mike Gundy, but it's hey, it kind of does matter. When you have a guy who's oh, we put in the backups, they're freshmen are trying to kind of get their legs under them and figure this whole thing out. It's oh, and there's another touchdown from Carson Beck. He's still in the game. It's dude, now we're totally losing the point of what college athletics is supposed to be like. There is supposed to be a little bit of sportsmanship. And there's
Eh,
another end. It was like, if you're upsetting a big team, like if you're Iowa beating Ohio State, smack them, beat them by 40. It's funny. Like
sure.
that makes sense. If it's a rivalry game and you're Alabama and you're beating Auburn by 40, smack
Yep.
them. That makes sense. If it's some random team, like if LSU's playing Kentucky and I'm like, we got to beat Kentucky by 50. I don't know. Bama's playing really well right now. Like, it just sounds mean. Like it seems so far removed from the point of the sport, which is competition, which this is not. And then, like, yeah, to your point, it's like I feel like on some level you end up rewarding teams that are sickos. It's like, bro, like, don't do that. This is just weird. I don't know.
Yeah, I want to see you be able to put your starters on the bench, not because I particularly care about the feelings of the other team. I just want to see you at your best when it should matter. And
Right.
I don't want to see you ever have to feel like that's some place you need to get to. So
And injuries, to your point, too. It's
yeah,
like, yeah, don't give your running back those extra carries. Don't have a guy coming over the middle against an angry defense that's trying to, like, hurt you. Because that's where you really get malice going. When you're up 40 points, you're still throwing the ball. Guy will just spear you because, like, he don't want to be there anymore.
exactly. For what? Yeah, what's
Yeah.
the point? So okay, so I threw that in there just because I think some people, and there's a chance that that'll be like a second or a third tiebreaker, and I'll roll my eyes because
Yeah.
I don't think that it should necessarily be valued that way. And neither should this one, although it is the true catch-all. It is the break glass in case of emergency tiebreaker. The last one on this list is the post-regular season college football playoff ranking. This is similar to what they changed to in the BCS era when they decided to bail on AD's voting. I just can't get over it. I can't get over it. And instead, they had the BCS rankings as that seventh tiebreaker. And I know what
Mm-hmm.
some might be thinking. This is a guaranteed catch-all tiebreaker. Why not just have this as the second tiebreaker or the third tiebreaker and just be done with it? Two reasons. One is that if it's a college football playoff ranking that's factoring in non-conference results, and factoring in non-conference results to determine a conference title game is kind of backwards. Just like we talked about that Florida example from the 2003 game. Just doesn't really make sense to me. If I'm trying to settle on LSU's spot in the SEC championship, why should I default to that game against Florida State? Why should that be part of the equation as to whether or not they go into, the SEC championship? If Georgia beats Clemson in the opener this year, why would we want to have that be a data point for an out of conference game to get into a conference championship, something that's supposed to be within the SEC? So from that standpoint, I don't like that really just to begin with. Another thing, this isn't the BCS era where those standings can come out as early as Sunday. Those playoff rankings don't come out until Tuesday night. And maybe there's a world in which you can get the selection committee to make an exception for the SEC and meet on Sunday to decide this. But on that selection committee, you've got a handful of people with active roles in schools. They're going to have rivalry week, which is obviously big for the university. And you could be hosting. You could have a million things going on during rivalry week
Mm-hmm.
when all that stuff is going down. That's not even just related to stuff on Saturday. And there'd probably be some pushback from a dude like Ward Manuel, who's thinking, wait a minute, it's Michigan Ohio State weekend. You want me to hop on a plane on Sunday morning so that I can sit in a room with the selection committee and deliberate on all of this stuff early just because the SEC couldn't settle on a tiebreaker that actually broke a tie? That's why I have to do all this and bail on rivalry weekend? Like, what are we doing here? That's not really fair to the team that's already in the SEC championship who didn't need tiebreakers, right? Because you're not figuring out who you're going to play until that Tuesday. And now you're putting them at a disadvantage by giving them essentially half a week to prep for what could be a monumental game for playoff entry or seeding. And I would just not be a fan of that as a fifth tiebreaker. But it is the break glass in case of emergency, the true catch-all. And that's the only reason it needs to be discussed today.
And I think part of it too is like not to try to oversimplify. Is like, y'all see how these people treat Notre Dame? Like, there are teams they like and there are teams they don't like. Like, there you saw it up to FSU last year. Like, it's just not worth it. It's just another like, hey, let's just go use the BCS standing at that point because at least you got more data points. Like, I don't know. It just feels like their team. Like, if you have an Alabama team and a Kentucky team with the same record, Alabama's getting in. So there's really just not a reason to do that because it's just who do you like better.
That's the other thing is the subjectivity of it. You're not, I guess, having athletic directors vote, but in a way you kind of are, right? I mean, to have those people sitting in a meeting and ultimately they're going to have the final say over who plays in an SEC championship, That's weird. That's
Yep.
just so unbelievably weird. And you could say, well, it was weird to have the computers decide it as well. Yeah, it was. And
Mm-hmm.
once upon a time, we just kind of took that as well. So, look, there are a lot of different things that I think will be discussed this upcoming week in Destin. But if you want to, college football powers that be, not just in the SEC, but other conferences as well, who maybe are settling on how this is going to look. If you want to take this tiebreaker system that we have just created here today, I only ask for two things. Well, very simple. Not looking for money or anything like that. I am just asking for any time the tiebreaker scenarios are shown during a game, and I guess during an SEC game, I want the SDS logo in the corner, like a watermark.
Okay.
Just let it be known.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like a restraining order for Bevo so that he can't get within 200 feet of Uga. These are my demands.
That's it. That's all we need here. We're simple people. Get Bevo out of here.
I don't need him out of games. I just need him out of places in which a beloved Bulldog can be, so that dumb steer doesn't decide to take matters into his own hands. Simple.
When they join they are joining the SEC. I'm sure we'll check out a game at some point, a Texas game, and I just need to get you a picture with Bevo looking angry. I think that's going to be our wallpaper.
I mean, can anybody get close to that thing, or is it just going to run wild and just try and deplete anything in its sights?
Mm-mm. It's not a polite lad like Ralphie. Okay, this guy he's wild.
Ralphie is unbelievably well behaved.
Mm-hmm.
Look, despite the fact that thing gets going at full speed before every single game, you don't hear about Ralphie causing a fuss. I'm just saying, like, there are rules and it is a privilege to be on that football field. Don't let Peter get a hold of this clip. Please don't. You get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, I thought that was worth discussing today. Any other thoughts on SEC tiebreakers? Because I feel like we're going to have one. I feel like we're going to have one this very first year where we're going to be digging these up and we're like, oh, what are the tiebreakers again? And we'll come back to this discussion that we had to see if the SEC actually took this seriously.
Yeah, I mean, so going back to, like, I don't know, any sport ever, the whole thing about, like, divisions and stuff, it's like 5 to maybe like 6 teams. Like, what's baseball? I think baseball's a little bit more because there's only 3 divisions, but it's like 5 or 6 teams. But like, either way, it's like, it really does not end up being this many teams. So I hope that we end up in more of like either a pod system or some type of a division split, because we're just going to deal with this every year. Like, it's one of those things, like, we're sitting here retrospectively looking at half of a championship bracket and going, okay, well, here's these situations where this stuff happened, it was just half of one, because the other side, like we're talking about, was already taken care of. It was LSU, it was Alabama, it was whoever, usually, right? And it's usually the East that's acted up, right? So point being, like, I think, other than that weird Arkansas year, anyway, so point being, like, I think this hopefully is going to be the thing that pushes us towards, like, hey, this is just too big to be divisionless, because the more you think about this, the more you're just like, we're going to end up really leaving some teams out that deserved a chance, and they didn't end up playing a schedule, or it just happened to be a weird gap year, or a team played a team out of conference and got punished for that. So yeah, I just feel like this is just too many teams. It's too messy to just not randomly, but to just pick 2 teams out of all these teams when they're all, I mean, again, we do the coaches draft and we go, oh my gosh, like, so many of the top 10 coaches are all in the SEC. Like, these guys want to win. So yeah, I think that, yeah, you could argue that sometimes the East has been a little bit down during the Saban years and / like Les Miles / whatever. The West was pretty consistent, but yeah, sometimes you would get like a 2 or 3 loss team in one side, but at the same time, it's like, that's just kind of football. Whereas here, it's like, yeah, you might have 3 1-loss teams. It's just like, these teams all deserve to play in this game. Like, and 2, they didn't play each other because the schedules are weird. So I think we're making this up as we go along. And the more I think about it, the more I think we are just, I hate to be a boomer again, but it's like, this just doesn't feel like it needs to be this hard.
I'm okay without divisions. I really am, because I think there are some years where I would have rather seen the 2 West teams playing in an SEC championship. And, there have been years in which, yeah, I understand that you take away the significance of the Michigan-Ohio State game and you're like, oh man, like this won't mean as much if they're just going to play again next week in a Big Ten championship. Fully understand all of that, not trying to minimize that. But at the same time, like, all right, yeah, I would like to see the 2 best teams face off again instead of seeing Michigan face Iowa, who, like, never had a chance of scoring a point. Yeah. Why wouldn't I want to see this game again? It's going to matter a lot in the regular season finale, and yeah, it's still going to matter a lot in a conference championship type game. And if we have SEC championships where that comes into play, and we have rematches because that's an actual thing. I mean, we had a rematch in 2017, and that was perfectly fine. Like we had.
Yeah. Well, I'll say this too, though. Like, think about this. It's the fact that with the amount of quality teams, I don't think that we're going to leave a team like that out if you switch divisions because it's going to be impossible to run. The old SEC East wouldn't be possible when you throw in Texas and Oklahoma because Texas has been the kind of slow horse there. And last year they made the playoff and beat Alabama at home, So it's like if you shuffle those teams over, then it's like, well, now you have Georgia playing Oklahoma and Texas every year, which I think is fine. So the issue with the Big Ten is that they put all the good teams in one division.
Yeah, look, I mean, at the time, Legends and Leaders,
Leaders and Legends, who could forget? Another genius Big Ten move.
The name was horrible. The divisions actually made sense.
Mm-hmm.
And now, though, I am okay with not pinning down those specifics. And this gets into the discussion about like scheduling, what it looks like 2026 beyond, 9-game conference schedule, rivalries, which are going to stay, which are going to go, all that stuff, which really isn't kind of the point of what I wanted to be able to discuss today. But I get that it's all kind of connected in a weird way. And there is definitely that connected tissue. But I still kind of would just like to be able to say, all right, you went 7-1 in conference play. You're going to have a chance to be able to play for a conference championship. That's fine. And you know what? Maybe in the 12-team playoff era, we're going to start to see the teams that are 6-2 in conference play, 10-2 overall, and they don't want to play in a conference championship because they don't want to risk that third loss.
That's a good point, too.
And knock them out.
That's the other thing. Teams are going to be avoiding it. And it's like, we saw that for the first time, I guess, with Alabama in 2017, where it was like, well, they were certainly better off for not having to play either of these teams.
No, they were not They were not trying to avoid
I'm not saying they tried to avoid it. I'm saying they were better off for not playing an extra football game.
Yeah, I mean, well, it depends. It depends how you look at that. Because if you win that game against Georgia, which, they eventually won that game against Georgia in that building.
Right.
Albeit with a halftime quarterback switch, then you're thinking to yourself, all right, we're sitting pretty in the playoff. So you had a path that wasn't necessarily just getting into the SEC championship and automatically losing and automatically hurting yourself.
Right.
So it's complicated. It's massive.
Yeah, that's the other part of it. Yeah, it's like, well, if you have 4 teams that are all like playoff teams, or maybe even like, you have these teams at the very top, and only 2 of them get to play each other. Well, that's a curse, not a blessing. Because if you get 4 teams that are all here and these 2 have to play an extra game and get guys hurt and determine which is the best of these 2 teams, whereas the other 2 teams are sitting there going, well, we think we should have been in there, so we're going to be training harder. We're going to be using this as locker room material. We're going to be doing all the campaigning on national airways, as we've seen plenty of head coaches do. So actually, it might be better to get left out, too, which sucks because now we're, trying to now our coaches don't think that way. They would never want to miss a game like that. But in the aggregate, like I said, Alabama not having to play that game certainly worked out for them.
But then you could still help yourself by winning the conference championship and then getting the first round bye, and that's why that's been incentivized. That's why that is still there in this system. So if you're already taking care of that, then there is still that motivation there. It's not just something that can necessarily hurt you. And there will be teams that maybe you were going to be like, hey, we're a borderline playoff team. We're not even sure that we're going to get in. You can win this game and lock down a first round bye. That's massive incentive to be able to do something like that. So I get it.
It's more about being taken out of the hunt, though, right? Because the team that loses that game, like Auburn in 2017, if you lose the SEC, well, then you're just out. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's the other part. There's 4 teams that are playoff bound. 2 of them play. One of those teams gets a home playoff game. The other one gets kicked off the mountain, and the other 3 teams move on. Well, that's a third of the team that lost because the other 2 teams didn't play.
Exactly, and that'll be a discussion topic for sure as it relates to an idle team that is like sitting there at 10-2 or even 9-3 that doesn't have to play in a conference championship game, but then like a 10-2 team plays in an SEC championship or a Big Ten championship and loses and then gets left out in favor of the idle team. And it's like, well, what was the point of that? I get that standpoint as well. But
forgive me if I missed this piece of news. What is Notre Dame doing? Are they playing in the ACC conference championship game just going forward, or are they just doing their own thing?
Doing their own thing. And
cool.
I'm okay with it because honestly, I think Notre Dame hosting a college football playoff game is huge. So massively huge for a program that has been very much defined by the lack of success against top 10 teams, as we outlined with the chaos scenarios and stuff like that, the lack of marquee victories that Notre Dame has had, really dating back since 1999. I think a program like that being able to have an on-campus college football playoff game as a possibility, if it's in that spot, and because that you're not going to have that first round bye available for you, being able to do that comes with great benefits.
I
And
mean, yeah, it does. I get it, but that's the other thing is that they're obviously not going to be playing the same quality of schedule as an SEC team. So back to my point, let's say you have Georgia, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, just to make them up, right? And Georgia and Alabama play and make this even easier, okay? And Georgia loses to make it even easier to remember, right? So that Georgia gets kicked off the mountain. You got Notre Dame sitting there with the 80th best strength of schedule. They have one loss, and they're hopping all these other teams that didn't get to play because they got left out because they weren't a division champion. They're hopping every team but the team that won their conference. So that's the other part of it is whatever we do, let's try to make it fair across the board to where the SEC expanding and adding more quality competition doesn't end up hurting them and end up having these SEC teams that, again, have 1 or 2 losses. They're at the back end going to Notre Dame in the cold, who did not have to play an extra game or play any of the quality opponents that the SEC teams did.
Yeah, I don't know that Notre Dame has necessarily benefited from that yet, though. Think about it. I guess 2018, a year in which they were undefeated going into that college football play, if I'm not mistaken. Then they got waxed by Clemson.
The one conference championship game they played, they lost. So it's hard for me to say
that. Was their first loss. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. That you're taking the success that they had without factoring in that they would have had more losses. Because again, Brad Kelly, say what you will, he was not going to beat Clemson twice that year, and that's kind of the whole thing. Is that if they don't play Clemson that year, maybe they're the 1 seed because they already beat them.
Yeah, I mean, how they treat that is going to be obviously a very popular topic of conversation, and what it looks like for those teams on the outside looking in of conference championship weekend. Let's say you're in one of these tiebreakers and you're on the wrong end of it. What does it look like for you as you wait on the 12-team playoff? How that all is going to look? How much sway will be given to the conference championship games? Just getting there is going to take on a new life in the 12-team playoff era in a way that it did not with 4 teams. Okay, good discussion. Yeah, we talked about that today. Interesting. Very interesting stuff. All right, let's kick it to Matt Baker. Nobody covers all the unique layers of college football in the state of Florida quite like Matt. So we talked about
some great work out there. There's a lot to cover.
Dude, there is. I was telling Matt this. I'm like, I feel like every month I have someone on that the first thing we start talking about is, man, we should have a law degree. Like David Hale was talking about that. Ben Portnoy was talking about that. Should have gone to law school instead of journalism school to understand some of this stuff. And Matt is super smart and is able to kind of make sense of a very chaotic time, and especially with the Rashada lawsuit, all the different layers to that, as well as the past, present, future of the big 3 in the state of Florida, plus some interesting hypotheticals for Florida State and Miami. So here's Matt. I'm now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Matt Baker of the Tampa Bay Times. Matt, let's start with the Jaden Rashada lawsuit, the thing that's been in the news very much this week. The former Florida signee, current Georgia backup, he is suing Billy Napier, Florida booster, Hugh Hathcock, and the former Florida NIL director, Marcus Castro Walker. This is all related to the $13.85 million deal that fell through, yada, 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 that basically had Billy Napier in this lawsuit promising Jaden Rashada $1 million upon signing with Florida. And that payment never happened. Everybody gets it by this point.
Sure.
What was your reaction to all of this? Which is, I said that I usually don't have an intro that long. It's a lot. But what was your reaction to seeing all this come out?
Well, my initial reaction is I was surprised it happened just based on the timing. I kind of thought if this was going to happen, it would have been a while ago when it was still fresh. I'm not, reading anything one way or another. But when I first heard about this kind of as a possibility, I was a little surprised on the timing. But once you actually start digging into the nitty gritty of this lawsuit, the Billy Napier, again, let's pause for a second. This is Jaden Rashada and his people. This is their side of the story. We do not know Billy Napier's side. We don't know the other people's side. This is one part of the civil suit. We will hear more. Okay. Period. New sentence. The idea in there that Billy Napier would have been involved in the allegation that basically he said, hey, sign with us and this $1 million is going to come from this booster. He's good for it. I swear, I promise. Whatever was said there, that's the thing that jumped out, right? The $13.85 million, we kind of knew about that for a while, but if Billy was that involved, there's some issues here, right? I have no idea, honestly, what the NCAA can or should or will do at this point in terms of what their rules are, in terms of what their enforcement is. I've tried to get clarity. I still do not understand. Maybe I'm just a simpleton and a moron, but I don't quite understand if they could do anything, if they would want to, all that type of stuff. I'm still unclear. But even if we put that aside, the fact is that Billy Napier is involved in this lawsuit. And I'm rambling now, but it's going to matter for a couple reasons. The biggest is, and most practical, is going to be recruiting, right? Now, I asked Billy after the Rashada thing fell apart. We talked to him on the February signing day, again, a couple weeks after it all went away. How are you going to handle this perception? How are you going to battle it? Because there's going to be a perception from recruits that, just to be blunt, y'all aren't paying your bills. And whatever the truth is there, perception is reality. And if one recruit and his or her family, or his family, they decide, I don't know about this. I saw that maybe they're not doing, maybe they're not living up to their bargain. That's an issue. And given everything else that's going on in Gainesville and his 11-14 record and everything, that's a major concern.
The pushback from Florida fans to that would be, well, DJ Lagway still signed with Florida. They're obviously taking care of it from some perspective. Maybe there was some buyer's remorse. What doesn't make sense to me, and the part that I can't fully wrap my head around, was how that price ever got to $13.85 million. Because we hear these crazy numbers, right? And I remember talking to Edgar Thompson about this, of like how there was no pushback whatsoever from Florida when that number was first out there. And if the Orlando Sentinel out there, and I'm not trying to call it competition or anything like that, but if there are people like that are putting that in actual publications, then Florida's not pushing back, then there's something to it, right? Because that point when it gets to that number during the summer, I'm trying to figure out where the breakdown was of buyer's remorse, where Florida ultimately tried to back out of this deal and tried to have, at the last minute, Billy Napier having that alleged $1 million call on signing day. Like, where is the difference in opinion here that got to Florida to that point of desperation where they were still doing that on signing day, allegedly?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. One is, Billy Napier's reputation is as a recruiter, right? And to do that, you have to bring in the really good recruits. And Jaden was one who was obviously extremely promising, top 100 recruit. I don't know how he's going to fare at Georgia, but clearly he's talented. A bunch of programs wanted him, right? So I can understand that in that type of competition, it's a bidding war, and my team cannot afford to lose, especially to an in-state rival like Miami and everything going on down there. So I understand why it's like an auction, right? Where you get all excited on eBay or whatever it is, and oh my gosh, I got to have this, and you end up paying more than you want. I could see how that would work. And then eventually at some point, where's this money coming from? Like that's a reasonable explanation. I can see how that works. The other part of this we have to consider too is this system is very, very stupid. It makes absolutely zero sense. I'm working on something on TampaBay.com as we talk here this afternoon about just some kind of bigger picture reactions, taking a step back from the nitty gritty and just looking at what are my takeaways, what are my thoughts as this goes forward. And one of them is that the system makes zero sense. And I understand the system has evolved since this whole thing happened, but just take the names away for a second. One player gets offered $13.85 million from one NIL entity, which goes to a different NIL entity, which goes back to the first NIL entity, and then has a football coach promising that some other guy, not the football coach, not the football program, some other guy is going to pay $1 million, all because a different program and a different third party offered $9.5 million to a teenager to play football, except it's not actually to play football, it's for other stuff. This makes no sense. It makes absolutely zero sense. It is such a stupid process, but the system had to do it because, oh my God, we can't pay players, so we have to do this fig leaf, and it makes zero sense. So as I go through all of this, there'll be time when we read all the lawsuits and the counter arguments and the defenses, and if there's counterclaims, all that stuff, as this gets played out, we'll figure out what the details are. But as I read the lawsuit, one of the things that jumped out is, how are we in this position as an industry? Because this is just dumb.
It seems like such bad money, to be honest with you. And
it's bad money. It's bad planning. It's a bad again, it's a bad system. I go back to something Scott Strickland said in Destin at the spring meetings. I guess this would have been a couple years ago now, where he pointed out like we've outsourced player compensation to a third party. I don't know that that's a really good idea. And again, this has nothing to do with Rashada. Take that out of it. But just that idea that College Sports Inc. Outsourced paying players to a third party, not for them to be football players allegedly, but they are. Like it just makes no sense. And honestly, the more I think about it, the more I ramble here, the more surprised I am that we haven't seen more of these things. And I know that Jaden Rashada is not the only person who thought he was getting X and is getting Y. Like I understand that happens, but I'm surprised that this is the first and really one of the only ones to come up this publicly, because the dollars are so high. The stakes are so high for the players, for their families, for the agents, for the coaches, for the programs. I'm surprised we haven't seen more of these yet.
And how stupid all of this is. Even stupider is the fact that the NCAA has navigated this so poorly that it can't enforce any of it. And after this Tennessee thing, nobody has any idea what can really be enforced, because if we were talking about this before Tennessee lost that, the suit with Tennessee, we'd be talking about, well, that's an obvious NCAA violation if proven true, that Billy Napier is like, hey, I'll get you the $1 million if you sign with us. And we'd be talking about this in an entirely different way. But I kind of wonder, does Florida have the ability still, even if that's not enforceable by NCAA standards, does Florida have the ability to pull a Jim McElwain? If things go south this year, in the middle of this year, does this now give Florida grounds to be able to fire Billy Napier with cause, even if the NCAA doesn't get involved?
So there's a lot of layers to that. So one is, would the NCAA get involved? And I do not know. I can see the arguments for it, because as far as I know, you still can't, pay for play is still illegal. That is what I have been told. Is this pay for play? If this allegation is true, it would seem like it. There's a pretty good argument that it is. But is pay for play legal? Is it going to be legal in a couple days? Right when when the revenue sharing thing with the House case, when that gets settled. So I don't know in terms of that. But again, take the NCAA part, throw that aside for a second. Let's assume that there's no investigation, no rules were broken. Okay. The other part is, what could the for cause mean? So I was looking at Billy's contract today, and there's 15.6.4, I believe it is everyone pull that up at home, but it's the termination for cause. And one of the provisions is, I'm paraphrasing here, but dishonesty or fraud, either in terms of what you represent before you sign the contract. Okay, well, that doesn't apply here. Or, again, I'm paraphrasing very loosely, but stuff you do that falls under the duties and responsibility while you're employed, while you're doing this contract. 4 of the 7 counts in this lawsuit deal with fraud or negligent misrepresentation is the other thing that's related here. So is there a scenario where you could really argue that? Yeah, probably. Do I think that will happen? No, probably not. Just because it would be a lot of holes to go down. It would end up with probably its own different lawsuit, yep. Right? With Napier and his people suing the school and all this stuff. The more likely scenario is not that they would fire him for cause with this, unless there's a smoking gun or something that we don't know about as we're having this conversation. But yeah, maybe they could do something like the McElwain thing, where it's, maybe we have a case, maybe we don't. You don't want to find out. We don't want to find out. Let's go between 0 and 27 million or whatever it is. Again, I want to be very clear. I want to be fair to everyone involved. That is the most extreme scenario, right?
Yes.
Or one of the most extreme scenarios. So I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not saying anything like that. But as we look at the contract and as we look at the facts as we see them right now, that is within the realm of possibility in this system, where literally almost anything is in the realm of possibility.
One of these other things that kind of came out of this lawsuit was, at least what multiple outlets were reporting, was that Kirby signed off on Jaden Rashada going through with this, which, look, it's a very interesting wrinkle to think about a Georgia player at a high profile position like quarterback going through with this and getting Kirby's blessing, because, if you just look at it, from big picture, you'd say, well, why would Kirby sign up for that kind of headache? And in reality, how many times is Jaden Rashada going to be available to the media? How much is Georgia actually going to have to talk about this? Extremely minimal. This is going to hang out over Florida unless some sort of settlement is reached, and we don't know if that's going to happen. But what did you make of Kirby allegedly, reportedly giving his blessing to Rashada to go through with this?
Well, it would make sense to me that Rashada and his people would just want to let you know, right? Like, hey, I'm going to sue your biggest rival. Just thought I'd let you know. Like, that's just common sense. I can understand certainly why Florida fans would put on the tinfoil hats here and think this is some sort of conspiracy. And oh my God, Kirby's out to get it. It's like I can, this is college football, anything goes, right? I can understand that argument. And again, I do think, regardless of what happened and how this ends, the simple fact that we are on here. Let me back up a second. So Monday night, Napier was in town on his speaking tour, going around the state. And I wrote a story that we published first thing Tuesday morning about how he had a top 5 transfer portal class, right? And how a year ago they were criticized, I think fairly to some degree, as being slow and too deliberate in the portal. Now they've got 3 high-profile transfers in May, and things seem to be going right. Then 3 hours later, this drops and it doesn't matter anymore. We're not talking, we're not on here. You didn't ask me to talk about this transfer class and whether things are going to get better and that type of thing. We're talking about this. And I have to imagine that as Napier and his staff go out on the recruiting trail, they're going to be asked about this. And again, it's just that seed of doubt. So I say that because you can see how that is to Georgia's advantage, right? If people are asking Florida about a lawsuit and not about their plan to get better, that's an advantage for Georgia. So I understand the conspiracy theory. It's fascinating because this is college football. That's what makes it great. However, this was in the works long before that. I know that for sure, with 100% certainty. It's not like Kirby came to Jaden after he signed the paperwork and said, hey, you know what you should do? Why don't you sue Billy Napier? That's a good idea. There was nothing like that. This had been in the works to some degree for long before this. So, yeah.
Okay, I do want to discuss some actual on-field things with football in the state of Florida. And for this question specifically, I want to exclude Florida State because I think they've earned that right. They've earned that right as a 13-0 team, playoff or not. But we can include Florida, Miami, UCF, USF, and I suppose we can throw in FIU, FAU if we want to really get in depth with it. But excluding FSU, which Florida team will earn the next playoff berth in this new 12-team system?
It better be Miami, right? Like, I went into last year with Florida State thinking it's not playoff or bust because of the 4 teams, but it's ACC championship or bust. And competing for the playoff was my expectation for them. Miami, it might be playoff or bust. I reserve the right to change my mind. What is it? May 22nd? We got a couple months before kickoff. I can change my mind. But as we sit here today, I don't see an excuse. The schedule is not very tough, right? As you kind of go up and down. And the opener against Florida in the Swamp is going to be, huge for both teams in terms of where each side going, where we going with the coach in year 3. But you look at the quarterback, they get Cam Ward, who's tremendously talented. Get one, probably the best running back in the portal or one of them, and Damian Martinez. You look at the way Mario's recruited throughout the rest of the stuff with the portal. You look at the talent. You look at the schedule that stinks. You look at a conference that Florida State's going to take a step back. I'm not sold on Clemson being great. And then you're down to like Virginia Tech. I say all that to say there's no reason why Miami should not be at least a 9-10 win team. And if you're a 10-win team in the 12-team playoff, you're going to be in that mix. So I think it's got to be Miami in terms of who will be next. Otherwise, they're going to have some major, major questions and major things that they're going to have to figure out with Mario and his future there. Because if he can't do it right now in year 3, then when?
It's a good question because that over-under is 9.5 wins, which looks really, really high. I mean, really high. And you think about that contract, which I believe has like $56 million left on it.
It's a lot.
It's got a lot of money left on it, and there are huge hopes that he can get it done year 3. If they go 7-5 this year, Matt, what's the conversation surrounding Miami this offseason, or I guess next offseason?
Like I said, if they couldn't do it this year, when? It's that simple. Like I kind of go back to one of my philosophies when it comes to college football. Everybody makes a bad hire, right? Everybody makes a bad coaching hire. And maybe not Ohio State, maybe not Oklahoma every once in a while, but generally speaking, everybody messes up. Sometimes you mess up 2 in a row. That happens. You can flip a coin, you get tails twice. Okay, that happens. But 3 in a row, or 3 or 4 or 5 in a row, that's not the head coach. It's an issue with the entire program. It runs deeper than that. And if Miami is in that situation where it's been 20, 22, 23 years since they've been really nationally relevant, other than the 1 year in 2017 with Richt, if it's been that long, you can't say it's one coach. It's not. It's one after another after another. You can try and point the finger, but right, you point here, there's 4 pointing back at you. I think it's one of those things where there must be something systemically wrong. And maybe it's the ACC, maybe it's the money, maybe it's they're still behind in facilities, and all that stuff. But like, they've got the dudes. That's not the issue. They're going to be one of the most talented teams in the ACC. It's not a matter of timing. Mario's had, this is going to be his 3rd year. That's enough time to put up or shut up. And if it doesn't work, then what is it about Miami that's making this fail consistently? Because there's no reason why Miami should not be in a 12-team playoff. They should be competing for a 12-team playoff most years, and especially this one.
I think there are times during the last, 15 years in which we have all wondered, are there systemic issues at Miami, at Florida State? And I think that all 3 of them were late to the game with facility upgrades. And that's not the end all be all now, but I think it hurt them at times during the 2010s, or at least the latter half of the 2010s, once that TV money kicked in. And I was curious about this. So I dug up some numbers on the top 50 recruits from the state of Florida going to one of those 3 schools, because the number in my head that I had on a yearly basis was like, all right, those 3 schools should be combining for 25 of those top 50 recruits from the state of Florida. So from 2015 to 2024, never hit 25 in a year, average of 20.4. From 2005 to 2014, those 3 schools had 25 of those signees 5 times, never less than 22, an average of 25, right at that number that I was thinking. Do you think there is a reason that there has been that drop off? Is it related to IMG? Is it related to, what is the specific reason besides kind of what I brought up there about the TV revenue and schools having more money to be able to recruit nationally, get into the state of Florida? Is there anything else to blame for that? Because you can't just point to one coach at this point when you see trends like that.
So a couple off seasons ago, my project, my off season was spent on a 3-part story on the past, present, and future of the Big 3. At tampabay.com, look it up. I'll send you the link later. And I say that because there are a lot of reasons why it is in this situation. If I had to point to one reason why the Big 3 has not been the Big 3 for a while, it is recruiting. It is the lack of in-state players. The dudes are here, they're just not coming, right? Like when Clemson won the national title, just down the road in Tampa at Raymond James Stadium, 3 of their better players, 3 of their top receivers are Tavius Scott from Eastlake High School, just down the road from here, Ray McLeod, an excellent returner from Sickles High School, all-time leading rusher in Hillsborough County, Tampa, and Deion Kane, who was one of the top receiving prospects in the country from Tampa Bay Tech. All of them went to Clemson. Right. And we can go on and on with this list. The guys that Bama got and that Georgia's gotten, on and on and on. So, all right, that's the preamble. There are a bunch of reasons. Facilities is one. I don't think facilities matter as much as coaches do, but the impact is not zero. I think some of it is, IMG, because if you were just looking at the numbers, some of those are a little bit skewed. I think all the mobility at the high school level in terms of in terms of players transferring, because it's crazy down here compared to Texas and some of the other states. I think that hurts. I think that hurts development. I think that hurts recruiting. I think if you look at high school coaching, that's an issue that I don't think it's talked a lot about at the national level, but it is a huge issue. You look at Texas and Oklahoma and Georgia, the top coaches there make 6 figures, top high school coaches I'm talking about. In Florida, they get a couple $1,000 stipend. The top high school football coaches in Texas are the directors of football, and they're paid as an administrator. Here, they're English teachers, they're gym teachers, they're economics teachers. So they're trying to do that and also get paid a couple grand to coach football. The development's not as good. There's a brain drain with high school football coaches going from Florida to someplace else. And if I'm making up a school here, but Tampa Bay Tech, if they were cycling through school coaches every couple years, how is the coach at Florida State and Florida and Miami and USF? how are they going to build relationships if it's a new guy every couple of years? So there's a whole bunch of reasons why they've been in this situation. If it were one answer, then it would have been fixed. But it was a whole bunch of things that kind of all came together. Certainly recruiting got more national in terms of the 247s, the rivals. Huddle made it easier. You can't hide a guy in the state of Miami anymore like you could in the 80s and 90s. Now, if there's a superstar speedster at Miami Central, everybody knows about him in 8th grade. Like, all these reasons kind of came together to the issue that we've seen, which is the top players in Florida are choosing to go elsewhere. Shoot, conference TV networks, right? My mom and dad can watch me. I go to Minnesota. All the games are on Big Ten Network. They can watch me. All these things together, where I think it took a perfect storm for the big three in recruiting and everything else to be the big three the way it was in 88 to 01, thereabouts. And all of those things kind of collectively unwound to get them where they are now, which is, you got one that's good, Florida State, and then the other two aren't there.
It's a great answer. And it's one that's got so many layers. That's a difficult thing to try and process, because I'm sure you've had so many people that have come up to you at any sort of function. Like, I'll get that question a few times in a given summer, you're at like a barbecue or something like that, or whatever. And someone chats you up about like, what's it going to take for blah, blah, blah to get back? And you've asked, we've had that question asked about all three of those programs at different times. And there is so much that goes into it. I've got an interesting one for you to get you out of here on. You cover a lot of Florida State, and I know that you know that program very well. I made the point that replacing Nick Saban is very, very different than replacing Ryan Day. If Ohio State has a vacancy at season's end, let's just say for whatever reason, it does not work out. Ross Bjork says, you know what, I'm pulling the plug on this. This is my first big time swing at this. Would Florida State fans have to sweat out the possibility of Mike Norvell leaving the ACC drama, all that behind, and heading off to Ohio State and going to Columbus?
So part of my initial thought is, well, yes, because this is college football and it's the silly season. That's how it works, right? Like, I mean, Florida State fans did this dance every year with Jimbo for however many years until finally both sides were done and he went to Texas A&M. So I think you can always have to sweat it out. Do I think Norvell would want to go? No, I don't. He seems very happy at Florida State, and I actually believe him, which is something I wouldn't say about a lot of coaches. He's got a really good system right now where they've recruited at a much better level. He knows what he's doing. He's getting what he wants. They're working on the standalone football complex that's under construction last time I was up there. I think the NIL situation is in a very good place. Maybe there's an argument that being the best in the ACC right now could be better than being number 2 to be whatever it is in the Big Ten. Maybe that's not crazy, where I have a better path to a conference championship in the playoff in the ACC. I don't know that that's crazy. But the other part that's baked into your question is, where is Florida State in the ACC in November, December, right? And I do not know. My guess is they're still litigating. I think January, February, that area is when push is going to come to shove in terms of all the lawsuits with FSU and Clemson in the conference. But maybe things will be resolved by then, good or bad. So there's a lot of unknowns in there. So the short answer to your question is yes, I think Florida State fans are going to have to sweat it out, because I think that's going to be that way. Look, Norvell's a really, really good coach. I think he's an offensive genius. The way he did it at Memphis, the way he's done it at Florida State. If I'm the head coach or if I'm the AD at a major program, would be on my short list until he says no. And I also think he can coach anywhere in the country too. He'd be fine in Big Ten country, SEC, Big 12, whatever it is. So yeah, I think they are probably going to have to sweat it out, even if I don't think he would take it based on what I know right now, if that makes sense.
Agree, 100%. Matt, great stuff. We'll do it again soon, man. Appreciate it.
Sure, thanks.
All right, well, pitch me SEC tailgates. I think we gotta set the stage here, because there are people that will say tailgating is overrated, and there are people on this earth that would rather be anywhere else than a college football tailgate. I'm not relating to those people. I'm not. And I'll be honest, some of the frustration that I have had covering games before is that I realize my tailgating experience is very limited. That is
Mm-hmm.
not, I'm not trying to complain. This job is fantastic. It's unbelievable. It has opened doors that I could have never imagined. And I am so unbelievably fortunate to do this job. But the amount of times that I've had to be like, I gotta head out. I can only be at this tailgate for like a half hour or an hour or something like that. And I gotta be able to get up to a press box and like do my job. That's that part is a little bit tougher. And the vast majority of times that I am personally going to a game now, I am unable to be able to tailgate. So that's look, rich man problems. I get it. I get it. But I
Yeah, I
love a
mean, if you want
tailgate.
to see this in action, you can just look at our banner pic from the Twitter where me and Connor are hugging at the Citrus Bowl, and both of us are the same shade of red. Him because he's in the sun, and me because I'm hammered. And that's kind of how our day went. You know, it was the best part of my day before the game kicked off. I guess halftime was the best part of my day in the LSU FSU game. But yeah, it's cool to kind of get after it. And I could do a little bit of both, right? I've run worn both pairs of shoes. But to your point, getting into a game like that for free is nice, you know, because those tickets can be hundreds of dollars. So yeah, it's definitely, you get closer to the athletes, but you got to be professional and sober. It's different strokes for different folks.
I will say my happy place is a tailgate.
Mm-hmm.
A happy place that I feel like I could just be able to soak in an entire vibe and the energy that often goes into a tailgate. Not saying all tailgates, but the right tailgate is one of optimism. And as long as it's not a noon kickoff for a bad team, more times than not, you can enjoy yourself at a tailgate. I am one that seeks good food, people that aren't too overly crazy because that's not really what I'm there to do past that stage of my life. Um, and yeah, music is definitely part of it. I like being able to feel like I can be at one place and not feel like I'm constantly roaming and I'm like with people that I know. I like being surrounded by people that I know and not just kind of like being in this sea of people that I really don't know where I am or what I'm doing. And having your bearings at a tailgate, I think, is really important. Some places to do that in the SEC are easier than others. And having a default place for a tailgate that isn't just the parking lot of the stadium. I think the parking lot of the stadium is fine, but there's
Mm-hmm.
something that's a little bit NFL-ish about that to
Yeah.
me. I don't think the college football tailgate is meant to be there. There are exceptions to the rule. Cocktail party, stadium parking lot, like right
Mm-hmm.
there. Unbelievable tailgating scene. It's second to none. I mean, the entire game is named after the cocktail party
Yeah.
that goes on before the game, during the game. And to me, like I would love I love a big open field, a big open space that the cars can be able to drive up and not necessarily have it feel as stuffy. People hiding drinks all the time or stuff like that. Like, oh, you're drinking in a place where you're really not supposed to be. I don't want to be on edge at a tailgate. I want good food on the grill, good people that I can that I can socialize with. If a TV is there to be able to watch some games, I'm on board.
Mm-hmm.
It's not totally necessary for me, but those are the box that I typically like to be able to check at a good tailgate.
Yeah, and I'll say this too because this is related. Do you have any tailgates that you need to declare that you have a special place in your heart that you can't evaluate for?
God, LSU was special, Will.
Yep.
I know there are probably people that are sick of hearing us just crown LSU. The food that I ate that day, 2019, the Auburn game,
Mm-hmm.
second to none. Second to none. And I didn't even realize that one could prepare. What was I can't remember the massive bowl, what that was called to be able to create. I think it was to be able to create the gumbo, but like this massive pot that had a
Mm-hmm.
very specific name. I don't know why I'm blanking on what it was. Shout out to my guys Nick Hallaby, Sean Larkin, who were there that day and got to meet them and hang out with them, and were so opening, like just inviting to us. And Mickey Sheremy, the hookup that
Mm-hmm.
he had for that game, it was just an all-time LSU experience that we were able to get that day. And like walking through the LSU tailgate, like totally got it, understood. It's hard to have better food than what we had that day. I'm blanking on what the name of that was though. I'm going to sound like such a Yankee for saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone just kind of does gumbo differently. Like the way that we imagine it's like Magnolite pots, like the ones with the like the old school like silver gray looking ones. Everyone
Okay.
makes gumbo a little bit different though. I mean, if they had a gumbo cauldron going that could be different. But yeah, my mom and my grandma always used the big Magnolite, like the scratchy silver ones.
It was elite, whatever it was. So yeah, look, I am a little bit impartial to LSU, and I haven't been to every single SEC tailgate. Like I'll admit that. Just the time of doing this job, I have not been to every one of these campuses. It's all the more reason why we have a pitch me segment, so that you, the people who have been to these places, can tell us why they are so great, and we can default to your knowledge. So, Will, do you have any besides LSU that you feel like you are impartial to?
Yeah, I mean, I got to start with LSU, obviously. Krista probably is the best tailgate I've ever been to. It's literally in the shadow of Death Valley. That was one of the moments of being like, I can't believe this is my life. Being there with her and her husband and my friends, who obviously we all took different paths to get there. And her husband's like Canadian, and we were all just like, John was talking hockey with him. It was like a real like out-of-body experience. Like we made it there. We got a parking pass. It was right next to the Hall of Fame. It was so sick. The food was amazing. We were watching that weird Tennessee A&M game or whatever. It was just a whole vibe. And so yeah, I think growing up in Baton Rouge, obviously like the Tiger Stadium stuff is special to me. Outside of that, I have lots of buddies that are Georgia fans. I'm not exactly going to say that that's like a bias for me. They've just shown out well, you know?
Yeah. And I realized I said impartial to, I meant partial to. Partial to means you have bias. Impartial is you're unbiased. Yeah. Words are difficult. Okay. Saturday Down South podcast and Saturday Down South on Instagram. We have, I think, 5 different SEC teams that are going to get some mention. Let's start with the ones that we got from the Saturday Down South podcast Facebook group. This one is from Zachary Warden. He says, not exactly a tailgate, but back in 2015, I went to see Tennessee play Missouri. It was Gary Pinkel's last home game, if I'm not mistaken. We won, and the fan base was very welcoming. Every bar we hopped to, somebody would buy us a drink and congratulate our team. It blew me away. I was expecting trash talk, but got pats on the back and shots of tequila. Also, country singer from Nashville was singing in one of the bars and let us skip the cover fee. He then sang Rocky Top 10 of 10, would visit Missouri again. I actually, when I initially read this, I thought this was a Tennessee answer, not a Missouri answer. Missouri having an elite tailgate scene is not something that gets talked about a lot. But I don't know that that's so much tailgate scene. That's just being welcoming to opposing fans. So while that is a very nice little hat tip to Mizzou, shout out to Mizzou fans. You've endured a lot. You got to this place. You're feeling good. I think that's more of an atmosphere type thing. So I should actually, that one's on me. I don't know that we can consider that one for pitch me. And I think we owe it to Tennessee fans probably to come up with a different Tennessee one. Are you okay with that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I'll say this. I have been to Tennessee. I've been to that weird Butch Jones LSU game in like 2016, 2017. I think 2017, because 2016 was like the good year that was supposed to be good. 17 was the year he got fired. And yeah, it was very like, again, you hear, I'm sure I've said this a bunch before, but you hear Rocky Top literally coming up the mountain that it never stops. It's one of the craziest things I've ever been a part of. I felt like I was in the Hall of the Mountain King. Like, it was like, there's no way to overstate how much you hear Rocky Top. And yeah, I think the local spots are really cool. I think the tailgates did feel a little bit corporate to me. I might just be kind of whatever. It felt, maybe I just didn't have an in like I do at LSU, but it felt very like, Tarpa Drape or whatever, like the white big tents that are all very like spoken for. And that's one of those is like, if I got in there, I probably would have loved it. I just was hanging out with the regular folks like under the bridges and stuff. The Vol Navy is really cool. I think that's really sick. I got to be on some of those boats. I think that was sick. So that's another like underrated thing, actually, or properly rated. The Vol Navy, I think, is fire.
Is it still tailgating if you're on a boat?
Oh yeah. Now you're doing 2 birds with 1 stone. Now you're drinking on a boat and you're tailgating.
Right. That's what I'm saying, is that is that more pre-gaming than the true definition of tailgating? And you're not necessarily on a true tailgate, like, back of a car, being able to do something like that.
Well, think about that. Yeah, if you go to the College Football Hall of Fame, I'm stupid. Remember this, guys. I saw the tailgating thing and I was like, oh, everybody just like eat food on the tailgate to their truck, because now it's like completely evolved from that, and it's all got like this. So might be closer to the origin of tailgating if you're eating out of a boat than if you're just in a tent. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe.
True. That is a good point. Yeah, I remember at Indiana they used to have there'd be like certain alcohol companies that would come through and they would have massive tents in the tailgate field at Indiana, which I will go to bat for, was actually really, really good. Good to the point where it's the reason why many people like myself after freshman year don't really go into the games, because tailgating is too good because we have nothing else to do. But they would have these big corporate tents, like Jim Beam or something would show up, and it was free to be able to go in there, and they would have a bunch of different drinks and stuff like that for you. But it was very, very corporate type feel. I almost felt like that was a break from tailgating, and that this was more of a separate scene to be like just under the tent without necessarily like your vehicle that's there or something like that. A little bit of a different vibe to it. A little bit of a different vibe. I have not done the boat deal at Tennessee. I need to be able to get to Rocky Top to do that, because that would be an all-time experience.
I want to say again, guys, we can be bought. If you have a boat and you're part of the Vol Navy, hit us up. We will come with you. We are open to being bribed.
Part of Pitch Me is just an open invitation to invite us to do things. So
facts. Yeah, couldn't say it better myself.
Exactly. Okay, let's go to this one from Andrew DiGiacomo. Andrew says, this is a hard one for me, but best actual tailgate, have to go with LSU. Walking around Tiger Stadium on a Saturday is just different. The mixture of fans and the smells wafting through the air, along with the anticipation of kickoff, makes it different than any other place. I do have to give a nod to Auburn for having the most welcoming tailgate. I visited Auburn 2 times as an opposing fan, and each time they were over the top welcoming to me and my wife, both LSU fans, random strangers offering to get us plates of food or drinks, having long conversations with people you just met. The culmination was meeting a man named Hot Damn Dave, an Auburn
there you
fan
go.
that had missed just one Auburn home game between the early 80s and 2010. He welcomed us to his tailgate as if we had been lifelong friends. Okay, great answer. Love that answer. Love when we get the pitches for other fan bases. That definitely makes a significant impression. Question though. He said an Auburn fan that had missed just one Auburn game between the early 1980s and 2010. Was Andrew at Auburn in 2010? Because if you're at Auburn in 2010, buddy, I can promise you they're welcoming and they're happy. They're happy about life and everything is going great. The true testament to a great family. And look, I'm not taking away from Auburn fans. Some of them, Marler will always say that, even as an Alabama fan, how nice Auburn fans are. The ones that I've dealt with are awesome, great human beings. But it's a little bit easier to be nice when you're in pursuit of a national championship. I'll say that.
Yeah, but I feel like Auburn as well, like their national championships kind of come out of nowhere, right? So it's like, it's not like they really have that, like they're only happy when they're fighting for a national championship, because it's very rare for them to be fighting for that. Like, it's kind of like, oh wait, this might be one of those teams. Hold on.
Okay. The answer stands. It's a good answer. It's a great answer. But that thought definitely crossed my mind of like, all right, so Cam was like just about to run away from Pat P, and they're about to clinch, they're about to clinch an SEC title coming up here. Life was very good on the Plains at that time. Yeah, that is a sign of a great tailgate, though. When you have people that you can have conversations with that you've never met before, when people are like, come take some of my food, come take this, come take that. We had that at Ole Miss, and Ole Miss and LSU were both like that for us, where it felt like we went to a bunch of different places where people are like, oh, you haven't been here before? Like, oh, come take this food, come try this out, come see what we got over here, blah, blah, blah. And I know it's not like that everywhere, and it's maybe not even like that all the time at those specific places, but it definitely had that sort of vibe. I've been to tailgates before where, like, even some at IU, where kind of walking around, I'm like, I'm a student here, and I like, this is like fellow student body and stuff like that. People are like, who are you? Get away. Don't be a mooch at a tailgate or anything like that. Right. If you're the type of person that's just like walking around literally looking for food, then obviously, I think people have a right to kind of be a little bit standoffish about you. Like, are you just here to like get some of our beer or something like that? Totally get that, because if you let people do that all the time, you're going to be left with absolutely nothing. And you're like, what's going on here? But the places that you can go to where you're actually like having an organic conversation with people, you've been there for like 20 minutes, you're like, yeah, plate of food, like, let's keep talking, something like that. That's the best. I absolutely love that. Even as someone that isn't totally comfortable in all situations like that socially, I can admit that. That to me is a very comforting thing, and what makes tailgating so beautiful and great.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. It's I think I relate to that really well. It's like the concept of like, I don't have to do anything but be right here. Like, I'm exactly where I need to be. I have my beer in my hand. It's cool that I'm here. Like you said, probably brought something, whatever. So yeah, I think that's definitely like part of, I think that's the heart of the experience.
All right, we got one from our guy Emery. Well, Nothing Finer Pod. I'm assuming Emery hosting Nothing Finer Pod. Shout out to them. Emery says, Georgia, sure, there are other great places in the SEC that are great, but the diversity of the Athens tailgate is what pushes it over the top. Everything from your standard tailgates from any of the fields and quads on campus to the greatest college town in America. You can start whenever the bars open downtown at any bar that fits your scene because there are so many in Cozy and Cozy down the hill to North Campus to any of the hundreds, if not thousands of tailgates before you arrive between the hedges at Dooley Field at Sanford Stadium. Athens tailgating scene was very solid. Love the diversity of it. Love that it felt like there were a lot of different places that you can go to. Sometimes I kind of just want one place where it feels like everybody is.
Mm-hmm.
I think Athens has a nice balance though, and we didn't hit like when I was there for, gosh, what was that? Yeah, that was 2019. We were there for the Mizzou game. That's right. That was the last time I had tailgated there. We didn't do the bars beforehand, but it was more of like kind of spread out type tailgating on campus where it was like, hey, you have your lot, you have your field that you go to, and it's a little bit more sprawled out, and then everyone kind of files into it. That's what the diversity that he's talking about. But it was pretty cool that you could walk through campus and see all these different places where people were doing that. Like whenever I go to Camp Randall at Wisconsin, what's very unique about that place is you like walk down like their main street and it's just like bar here, bar here, bar here, outdoor tailgating. And even though it's not like all collectively together in the same place, it all kind of feels like it's one. And so that's pretty unique. It's pretty difficult to do. And it is kind of nice that if, you're like, hey, I want to go to the bars, to be able to tailgate one day, you have a good scene to be able to do that. Georgia, definitely a contender. Hard to argue with anything Athens related.
Yeah, I mean, it's all rolled into one, right? Like I started to joke about like, why do Georgia fans write like they're writing a novel all the time? But I think it's all related to their ability to kind of plan and collect these things. Because if you go through Athens, it's like, oh wait, everything makes sense. Like that's the other thing is like Marlo Staddy always talks about like the amount of bars per square mile. It's like whatever experience you're looking for in Athens, you could probably find it.
Yes.
Yeah, it could be a little bit sterilized. Like the charm of like an LSU or even like parts of Florida where it's like kind of more like a down home type vibe. Maybe that's not as much there at Georgia, but it's a lot I've found more like welcoming because you can kind of jump from tailgate to get, but then like bars are bars, right? So it's like if you know one person or two people and you hit their tailgates, you're like, all right, I've been here for 2 or 3 hours. I got hours to go. Where do I go? Oh, there's an unlimited amount of bars. They'll just swing back by the tailgates before they close up and just tell everybody hi and bye and everything. And so in terms of like ease of access, like if you just gave me a map or whatever, if you just gave me like drop me in the middle of the tailgate and we're like, hey, you don't know anybody, go figure it out. I think Georgia definitely makes a case because it's so well planned out. Because the people that do it are serious. Shout out to our guy Perry, and also I've also tailgated with Emery, who goes by John in real life, and they were actually at the same tailgate, which just goes to show, like I said, it was like Perry, who's like kind of like they're both kind of eccentric guys in very different directions, and they're both having a great time at the same tailgate. And we got two like big Chungus Georgia fans with the giant hats on that are like each 3 times the size of me, and I got my LSU gear on, and like they're all being cool to me. That's the other thing about it, is like how can you be like how you're treated as an opposing fan at a tailgate, I think really matters. Because the places that I'd put like at the top are welcoming because they understand that what they have is special, right? It's not like exclusionary. It's not like, oh, well, yeah, you're wearing an LSU shirt, so like forget you. And maybe it's different. Maybe if I was wearing a Florida shirt, they would have been like, dude, get out of here. You know, LSU was just also, it was kind of a perfect because they were playing at noon. LSU plays, so it was like, I'm going to throw the LSU game on. You guys want to watch Mizzou, Kansas State? Sure, we'll do it together. And so point being, like, yeah, I think that was a really big plus for me. At both Auburn and Georgia, where it was like, oh, yeah, it feels like you're here and it's not like you're not imposing on anyone. They want you here, even though you're not a fan of their team.
How someone takes tailgating seriously is if they outline all the different specs for you. My guy Perry, tailgating is a sport for him.
He's a machine. He's got the custom chain. He's got the squad. He's got the name. He's ready to go.
He's got the sound system. He's got the playlist. He's got the multiple TVs. He's got the Publix, the entire variety of pub subs and whatnot, and your own Chick-fil-A sandwiches, whatever the case may be. Like, it is a craft that he takes great pride in to be able to have that elite setup. And the people that do that, man, you help make this college football world go around. Like, truly, like from the bottom of my heart,
Yeah.
showing up to your tailgate is the best. Like it's absolutely awesome. And Perry was texting me about it this morning. He's like, "Oh, I see what you guys are talking about today. Need any of my insights?" Like, yeah, if there was ever a person that's got great insight. Yeah, of course.
That's like he's like it's like a super utility player with that stuff because he knows a little bit about everything. He's not the guy, he's sober, so he's not trying to get like drunk and belligerent. He's always there to help. He's always there to set stuff up, tear stuff down. He's got a really good analytical brain. So he's like a great guy to have at a tailgate. And like I said, I think all this just represents Georgia because like, yeah, I've been to the Georgia tailgates where I've gotten, harassed and stuff and barked at and like the ones like under the bridge in Atlanta and stuff. And I get it. But at the same time, like the places that I want to be are very, just like I said, well thought out, which is so rare when you think about a tailgate. It feels like sprawling and there's like stumps and trees coming over. With Georgia, it's like, you're right here. You're where you need to be. You're good. And if you need something else, it's right there.
Getting barked at is a rite of passage, Will. It truly is.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, and being like having bars close enough to the stadium too is an underrated thing that like not a lot of places have. Like that's not something to be able to take for granted. Like if you're going to be at the bars, it's like, oh, am I going to like Uber to the game? Like how am I going to be able to set this up? And Georgia certainly checks so many boxes for great tailgating. Okay, let's save the Grove for the end here. Let's go to this one from Val Golfer 2003, who says, "I'm a Bama fan and love tailgating in Tuscaloosa, but living so close to Auburn and having friends and family that are avid Auburn fans tailgating Auburn for years and have loved every minute of it." Huh. Okay. We've got a Bama fan saying Auburn, best tailgate, best vibes, maybe best people. Look, if you can exist in your rival's tailgate scene and feel like it's welcoming, I think that there's something to be said for. And I know, as you just mentioned, sometimes it's nice to get a little bit of that pushback. You get barked at from the opposing fans. You just kind of let them know, like, hey, you're there. Acknowledge your presence. Now let's enjoy each other's company and have a good time. Talk about some college football. Talk about whatever, and just enjoy the fact that we are here in this moment, able to be able to do this and enjoy this thing that we all love.
Yeah, I mean, the Auburn thing is so special to me. Like, because I went during the 2010 season. I know I probably told the story before, but went with some family friends. It was the most welcoming group of people. And this was, like, at the time, like a top 5 matchup. That was the Patrick Peterson game you were talking about. And I just, the entire time was like, I was in high school, so I wasn't exactly like, I wasn't as aware of life as I am now, but I was still being like, polite. And people were being polite back to me. Like, even as a high schooler, they were like, hey, like, you can have like a beer or two, like don't go crazy or anything, but like here you go, like da-da-da. It was super cool. Everybody was so polite, like I said. And then, in contrast with like the times I've been walking out of Bryant Denny and my stepdad had to fight somebody, after that game, I had like, we ran into Kenny Irons actually, now that I think about that. It was super cool. He was just like, what's good? And then after the game, I've told the story before, but I saw one of my favorite sights I've ever seen in my life, which was Cam Newton riding a moped. I could see his giant smile coming out from under the visor after he had just ran over my defense. I was no longer upset. I knew that the better team had won because I saw the joy in Cam's face. I became a Cam fan from that day. And the thing that's crazy is I had gaslit myself into thinking that didn't happen because it sounds too good to be true. And then when he re-signed with the Panthers a couple of years ago, like 2021, he posted a video of him riding a moped. And I went, oh my God, it was real.
So you realize, though, there is a very likely chance that moped was from Florida because everybody at Florida has mopeds.
Yep. That's a good point. Like the Vespas, yeah.
And so the scene that you're talking about of him riding that out of the stadium after the game or something like that, which, that's kind of funny to think about to begin with. I guess we're past that. Everybody's, in this era, we no longer have Dodge Chargers. Guys have like Lamborghinis and stuff like that are, acquired legally now. But that moped had to have traveled from Gainesville to Auburn. And is there any universe in which Cam Newton is riding a moped on the highway for a long period of time? Now, maybe he's got a moving truck, but that's not fun for this conversation.
But I could see it. Yeah.
But is there better than a 0% chance that Cam Newton rode on his moped from Gainesville to Auburn? And man, what a sight that would have been to see.
Yeah. I'm just so glad it exists. Like I said, like I get the Cam can be kind of like arrogant sometimes, but his aura is so happy, and just seeing his big old, he looked like a praying man, this dude. And yeah, again, I guess it's a thing he does because he posted on the Panthers thing, so it's higher than 0 for sure.
Yeah, who's tailgated with Cam Newton? That's what I would love to know. Cam just shows up to your tailgate, big old hat on, something like that. Everybody's like, "Hey, Cam, eat my food. Here, have a drink, Cam. Let's throw the football around a little bit." That'd be
That was
great.
the best. And shout out to I did a Georgia Tech tailgate for SDS, whatever they're doing, like a Synovus deal, I think. And somebody said there was a story like that with Calvin Johnson, where he would just show up to random tailgates for years. Like even when he was in the NFL, he would just show up. Like if they had a bye week, he would just show up to random tailgates. It's like this guy's like building wells in like third world countries. He's a genius. He's 6'6". He runs like a 4.3, and he's just having a catch with the guys. And like that checks out. But yeah, point being, that was the best I had ever felt after an away loss. I literally was like, I saw Cam. Sure, I'd rather LSU win. But 1A is seeing Cam on a moped. I just got in the car with my buddies and I went, that was cool. I would do that again, even if we lost.
I would do that. I mean, it depends. Like, if you're famous to the point where you can't even enjoy yourself in that setting, that's a little bit different. Calvin Johnson could probably throw on a hat. People would look at him and be like, "Is that Megatron standing over there by the
Yeah.
cooler? That might be Megatron." But like, if you can kind of blend into the crowd a little bit at least, and just like enjoy it, yeah, just show up at random tailgates and do that. You don't need to go to a local park and play kids and pick up football or basketball or something like that to prove yourself. You don't need to do that. Just go to a local tailgate and just enjoy yourself and enjoy the celebrity status that you've earned and the way that people probably treat you in a setting like that.
I have the opposite of that story. I have no reason to have ever told this on here before, but it's one of the funniest things that's ever happened to me. So my buddy Walt, went to high school with him. We interviewed him for another one of these SDS things. He was at Alabama, like a student at Alabama. He was like, but he's 6'4". He played basketball in high school. He's just kind of like an athletic looking dude, I guess. We're interviewing him for like just like this random like on campus segment, like interviewing tailgate guys, because he was just like he was in broadcast, like we knew he'd give us great stuff. And dude, a line started forming behind us trying to get autographs from him because they thought he was a Bama player.
I mean, if you're 6'4", that happens to you on multiple occasions. It just does.
Yeah.
That type of height, you're going to stand out probably, and you're going to have people come up to you saying like, "Oh, are you someone?" Even last night, I was at this event for Tom's Watch Bar in Orlando here, which is the new biggest sports bar in Orlando. It's huge. It's awesome. There's like Magic players there. Like Nick Anderson was there, Bo Outlaw, Terrence Ross.
Oh, yeah.
And like you're looking around like, wait a minute. Like I know those guys, but like, is this guy also a Magic player?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
oh, this person, like the manager is like 6'3" and he's just like built. And I'm like, wait, is this guy also like an athlete or something like that? And it's like, no, he's just a manager. But it happens. Like sometimes you see people like that out in public, and you're just like, oh yeah, I don't know, maybe could be. Wouldn't be crazy if you were a celeb, at a tailgate or at a function like that. I would certainly love to do that. So makes sense. All right, let's close with the Grove, Will. This from B Maraldo 10. Any answer other than Ole Miss is wrong, and I'm a Georgia grad / season ticket holder saying that the Grove is the GOAT. And then Christia Walker says, State fan here. And we have some good ones, but definitely Ole Miss. I have been to every SEC stadium, and the Grove wins. Wow. That is, you've been to every SEC stadium, and you're a State fan, and you're still saying Ole Miss.
They're feeling good this week, the State fans, right?
True.
They feel like they don't need to rub it in. So I really like the sportsmanship from the State fan to be like, I've been everywhere. I appreciate that. And that was the overwhelming kind of thought, is that a lot of people is either LSU or Ole Miss, a lot of going back and forth, and just people saying like it was crazy to not say Ole Miss, and lots of opposing fans saying, yeah, you got to just pick Ole Miss. Like that's what they're known for. They may lose the game, but they win the tailgate. You've been to the Grove. Like, what was your experience like?
It's very unique, and it's hard to kind of comprehend. And even looking back on pictures, it doesn't really convey the enormity of how big the scene is, how difficult it is to kind of move around once it really gets going. And that was for 2018 when they weren't particularly good, still dealing with sanctions and stuff like that. It was against Bama, and plenty of Bama fans were there that day. But I remember thinking to myself, okay, I get it. I totally get it. You can go from one tailgate to another, and just as I talked about with Perry and the effort that goes into it, and people treat that like their Super Bowl. And in some ways, maybe it'll turn you off. Maybe you're not the type of person that wants to see a chandelier in your tailgate, and you don't want to have to think about how you have to get there the day before to be able to set up everything that you've got to go that you have going into this, and it's a bit intense. And so if I was a person who had to tailgate, and if I was like setting up my own, and if there was pressure on me to be that person at the Grove, I'll be honest with you, I'd probably be pretty intimidated. I think that's a difficult thing to have to like get into, and a difficult standard to figure out. But just in terms of being a neutral consumer of it, it's really cool. That is the type of setting space wise that I think makes the most sense. Right next to the stadium. So you're not like, oh, the biggest tailgate scene is like far away from the stadium. That doesn't make a lot of sense in my opinion. You're right next to the stadium, and it's this huge field. And yeah, it's difficult to be able to move around, but in our experience, I felt like for the most part, people were super inviting. And even though it felt like I was underdressed, I was wearing like a Ralph Lauren polo and chinos or something that day. Even I felt underdressed for a game that I was going to cover, which is just a weird vibe overall. It's still incredibly cool. And it's cool that a place like that can get up for a game that they know they're going to get demolished. And that was at least the conversations I had with people there. That was 0% of what we were talking about. And it was more about like, oh, like SEC football as a whole. And like, this is just what we do. And to me, that is what makes this sport beautiful. Like, imagine if the Charlotte Hornets had this unbelievable pregame scene that people are like, oh, you got to go. Like, they block off the whole street. Every game feels like a party. It's so unbelievably cool. And Ole Miss is no longer the Charlotte Hornets. So that's not why I'm saying that. They were at the time, 2018. Right. Okay. So to be in that setting, it gives you a different kind of appreciation for it, because I've seen really good football where I didn't think the tailgate was particularly inspiring. And I just think that element is, it is unique and it gets a lot of hub, but I think it gets a lot of attention for very good reason.
Yeah, I'm just like going through pictures of this, and yeah, so much of this sticks out to me. To your point, people are very well dressed, which is crazy. A lot of chandeliers. Yeah, I think, yeah. To your point, I really feel like I just got to give it like an in/A or an in/C because I just haven't been. But it feels like from looking far away that this is nuts. Like, I mean, it's funny because the best example is, and I hate to say this, is true. It's the New Orleans Saints, right? It's the fact that Saints fans are always these partiers. The Saints weren't very good, but they were showing up. It was always, downtown, Bourbon Street, all that. So, yeah, I definitely get it. That feels like my childhood, actually, now that I think about that, looking up how playoff games work. So, yeah, I think this is super cool. I need to go check it out. I really have never – that's the funny thing. Like, if you go talk to, like, my mom's, one of her runners actually was like an older guy who was just like trying to stay active, and he played like the baseball at LSU like way back in the day, and he just like hated Ole Miss, like because that was like the old like rivalry, like Ole Miss, Tulane, like that, and like over my life it's not really been that way, just because Ole Miss has some fun games with us. They've had some players I don't like, but it's not been like Alabama. Like I've had more gripes with USC over my life, honestly, and so point being, like I really would not walk into it as like a hater. I think it would be pretty cool. So yeah, it's one of those that's like, you could talk about, not to be this guy, you could talk about, like the Rebels and all that, and maybe like less of that's better. But at the same time, like Ole Miss being good is really unique and cool because this is a fan base that has brought it every year for the Walk of Champions is from the 60s or from like 60 and 61, I think were their last two. They were back to back. One of them was 60. So point being, like, yeah, the fact that they brought it for years and years and years, the fact that it feels like a code, there feels like a culture. It's not just like a bunch of random stuff. It's like everybody's doing similar stuff, but they're all making it unique. Like this looks beautiful. And I've obviously like heard about it. We've all heard about it, but to really just like scroll through 1,000 pictures and see how every tailgate gets down is nuts.
It feels so authentically SEC. Mm-hmm. It truly does. And I've been to Big Ten tailgates. There's nothing like that. I can promise you there is just absolutely nothing that exists quite in that way. So why don't we do this? Because I think that was the best pitch from Christia. It's Krista A. Walker. Christy A. Walker.
Yeah.
Apologies. I think that was the best pitch coming from a State fan who's been to every SEC stadium who's saying, yeah, it's still the Grove. So the Grove wins this discussion, but I will admit, I don't think it is for everyone. I think that LSU and Georgia, any person can go to and enjoy and like. And Auburn is probably, based on everything I've ever heard, because I have not been to an Auburn tailgate, so I cannot default to this. But everything that I've always heard is like you will probably have like the best conversations, feel the most welcome at an Auburn type tailgate. Whereas like, you go to Georgia, you're gonna get barked at a little bit. You go to LSU, it might be like, what's that food before? Like, just trust me, just eat it. You'll like it. I promise you that. So that's probably maybe the best way that we can kind of handicap this tailgate discussion, because Lord knows there are so many good ones in the SEC.
Yeah. I think. I mean, so do you have an official answer?
Yes, my official answer is Ole Miss. If there is a tailgate that you need to go to, and if someone asked me, Connor, what's the SEC tailgate that you absolutely need to go to? And I have not been to all, so I'm admitting that. But I would say, based on my knowledge, everything that I have heard, experienced, all that stuff, Ole Miss. You got to check out Ole Miss. If you're picking between like, would I go to Ole Miss? Would I go to Georgia? Would I go to LSU? Would I go to Auburn? Go to Ole Miss, experience it. It might not be for you, but I promise you it is the one that you will have the biggest impression of, and it will feel most unique. Like oh my God, I went to such a very one-of-one college football tailgating experience. Like if someone was coming over from England, I'd say check out the Grove. Just check out the Grove, and you will see what American college football tailgating is all about.
So, yeah, just because I have not been, like I said, but I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust all you guys. I think this is the way to go. Because at the end of the day, and there's something we did not talk about with the Auburn thing, which is like, do we include rolling tumors in this? Because that's like a post.
I don't think that can count. Then we're getting into post game traditions and stuff like that. And then where's the cutoff? Does it count? Does halftime stuff count? Does what you do going into the fourth quarter? Is playing Dixieland Delight? Does that count? Is playing neck count? No. It's tailgates before the game.
Yeah, I think that's okay. So wow, I've never really thought about this before. So I've been to Auburn a couple of times. The one time in 2010 was pre-Harvey Updike when there were more trees. This is just my opinion from going after. It's actually nuts how many trees got killed by Harvey Updike. Like, that guy was a terrorist. We obviously don't call him that, but he's a terrorist. And so point being, like, that sucks for me because I really did like tumors and it gave me that exact – I still do, to be clear. It's not like they did anything wrong. But I wish like I had seen it more than once before that, because it does also give me that very SEC small town vibe. But that being said, I need to go to the Grove. I think I'm going to go with the Grove. I think that like if you're ranking in terms of like, because like LSU, again, I can't pick LSU. We all know this. LSU is like a unique experience because every tailgate, there is no much like being Cajun. It's different for all of us, right? So every tailgate, there is no uniformity. Like, you look at the Grove and it feels like they all got the same memo. Kind of like Yale practice in a way, but a little bit cooler, right? For LSU, it's like, oh, this guy has a green tent because that's what he found in his backyard, but he's cooking the most fire gumbo you've ever seen. I do like an element of uniformity. So I think Ole Miss is cool for that. I think Auburn's cool for that. Me personally, I have had the best time outside of LSU at a Georgia tailgate. I have not been to Ole Miss, but I'm going to trust you. I think that Ole Miss, based on everything that you've just said, probably is it, because at the same time, like, Georgia has been a 10-win team for like my entire life. Ole Miss is not. They only have one 11-win season ever. Georgia does that in their sleep. So I think, if we're going to use all of our criteria from everything else and say it's independent of winning, it's its own thing, it's uniform, it's all like all that stuff. And yeah, like I said, I'll see if I go to LSU fan if they're nice to me. That puts it right there. That's the only question I have.
I don't think there's a bad answer here. Well, there's probably some bad answers, but we didn't discuss any of those potential bad answers today. Only the good ones here on Pitch Me. If you
Vandy, you're in Nashville. Hey,
yeah, exactly. I don't know that you can count that tailgating, but
just throw a chair off a bar roof.
Sure, like nobody ever does that. That's very unique, one-of-one experience in that in itself. If you are upset that you didn't hear your team on Pitch Me, it's probably because we didn't have a good enough pitch. So you should be able to follow us Saturday Down South on Instagram, or join the Saturday Down South podcast on Facebook as well. If you have not, leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, our growing YouTube channel, Saturday Down South on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Set Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.